Stephen J. Abramson. Today is December 10th, 2012, and I have the honor of interviewing multiple Emmy winner Jeff Probst. And by multiple, I mean like at least 4, I think. This is for the Archive of American Television, and we are in Los Angeles, California. So what was your name at birth?
Jeffrey Lee Probst.
And where and when were you born?
November 4th, 1961, Wichita, Kansas.
Okay.
At Wesley Hospital at 1:11 a.m.
Wow, that's good. And where did you grow up?
In Wichita, Kansas. And then when I was a teenager, we moved to Seattle, Washington. My dad was with the Boeing Company. And that was pretty much what changed everything, was getting out of Wichita.
What's your dad's name?
Jerry Probst.
Okay. How about your mom?
Barbara Probst.
And what did she do?
My mom raised us. My mom was a full-time mom. And then the minute we were raised, she started a whole nother life. And my dad was an executive at Boeing, and we lived, I have 2 brothers, and we lived a very traditional Midwest life.
Okay, so you had 2, what were your brothers' names? Or what
Brent
are your brothers'
Probst and Scott Probst.
names? I'm sorry, say that again.
Brent Probst and Scott Probst.
Okay.
Both younger.
Okay. What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
My mom is a social person, and I inherited that from my mom. She can talk to anybody and loves to talk to people and is truly interested in their story. And I don't think I realized that I took that from my mom until I was much older. And then all of a sudden, the dots kind of connected. I went, wow, I get that from you. Just natural curiosity. And from my dad, I think it's the sense of, well, really, this is a pat on my own back, but I think what I got from my dad is trying to be a good person to other people. My dad was the dad who seemed like every night when I was a kid at 10 o'clock, somebody would knock on the door and it'd be, hey, Jerry, sorry to bother you. The plumbing in our house is, hey, Jerry, my car's stalled. Hey, Jerry, I got a squirrel stuck up in there. And my dad would say, just a minute, Bill, just a minute, Jim, just a minute, Tom. He'd go in the garage and he'd get like 6 tools and he'd walk over, and my mom would go, Jerry, you're going to go out tonight? Barb, what do you want me to do? The plumbing is. Now, I can't do any of those things. I didn't get the fix-it gene at all, but I feel that thing from my dad to be there for a friend if they need you. Not saying I always achieve it, but I think that's a quality I took from him.
What were you interested in when you were growing up?
I was always interested in telling stories, always. And I remember for Christmas, I asked for a TV, and I got a 13-inch TV with the express rule of you cannot watch it once you go to bed. So I would go to bed, the lights would be off, and my mom and dad would be upstairs, and then I would turn on the TV and turn the volume off, and I would watch Johnny Carson do his routine, his monologue. I couldn't hear it. And I remember I'd watch it until my eyes would just be falling asleep. But embedded in me was that idea of him telling stories every night.
Were there other TV shows that you loved to watch back then?
Well, I liked all of the really fun TV for kids, the Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island. And I loved all of those shows. But what seared in my brain is Johnny Carson. And I've never really seen anybody like him until the new guys on the block, the new young guys. Jimmy Fallon seems like he could be a guy that could reach that. Really genuinely likable, roots for his guest, wants the show to be fun.
Right. So as a kid, did you perform? Did you like to be?
I wasn't a performer as a kid at all. No. I don't really recall ever performing. I was never in, choir or any of that.
By watching Carson, when you said that something hit you, did you think that this is something you would like to do? To do something where you were in front of an audience?
I think unconsciously I was studying him and didn't even realize why, but just trying to learn. I'm not a comedian, but just learning about how to tell a story and how to keep an audience interested. And then in high school, I started making short films and really liked it. Wasn't very good at it, but I liked being able to direct the pieces to tell a story. And ultimately, I'm pretty sure the reason I'm in front of the camera as much as I am is to be the final voice in the story. It's more about control. It's not that I grew up saying, I have to be in front of the camera. I just love getting the applause of people. It's not that. I like being the final voice. So no matter what happens, the actor or the host on a show like Survivor, you get to be the guy that puts the cap on it. And I like that. My wife says it's because you like being in control. That's really what it's all about.
Well, sounds like you like to help shape the story too.
Love to help shape the story.
So when you were like in high school, did you know what did you wanted to be? Did you think you wanted to be a director, or did you really know at that point?
I think in high school, I didn't know if I wanted to be, what exactly I wanted to do. I just knew it was about telling stories and shaping stories. And I started buying books that I didn't even really understand. If it was about directing or acting, I would just buy the book and read it. Right. I didn't even know what some of the terms meant. I wouldn't have any idea what crossing the line meant or above or below the line meant. Right. I just knew they were important things that I needed to learn.
So tell me about school. The name of your high school was, what was it?
Well, I went to two high schools. We
Okay.
moved. So I
Okay.
went to Southeast High School in Wichita, Kansas.
Okay.
And then we moved to Seattle, and I went to Newport High School.
Okay.
And-
And what about college?
College, I moved back and went to Wichita State for a girlfriend. And then I moved back to Seattle and went to Seattle Pacific University. Never graduated.
And I read that you also went to culinary school?
No, and
No?
I'm so sorry that you have to go through this, but
Okay.
I have taken it off Wikipedia
Oh, okay.
so many times.
Oh,
I just got
huh.
asked this just 2 days ago.
Wow.
And I always feel bad for the interviewer
Yeah.
because, oh, it's Larry King.
Oh, wow.
Asked
okay.
me, and he goes, why do
Yeah.
I have this? I go, Larry,
Right.
I take it off on a Monday. It seems like it's back on a Friday.
Wow.
It's almost like someone is watching just to, no, I
Yeah.
can't cook a damn thing.
And if your name were like John Smith, you could see that someone might confuse it. But your name is pretty, it's
Yeah,
unique.
you're right.
Unique enough, I think that, how could they mistake that?
Well, Larry
Interesting.
King actually said, next time this happens, but I can't do it to you.
Yeah.
He said, next time it happens, just go with it. And we role played on his show, and I said, okay, ask me again, and I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you what. And he said, what was difficult about cooking? And what?
Well, then I don't have to ask a follow-up question about your aspirations to be a chef. then.
Yeah,
Okay. So what was your first job in the entertainment industry?
My very first job was at the Boeing company. My dad got me a job. They had a massive, it sounds crazy, but Boeing at that time had a massive film department. And they would make these marketing and training videos. And so I literally started as what would have been a production assistant. I knew nothing. And he would just let me kind of sit around. And then I got to start pushing buttons on editing machines and started doing some offline editing. And then one time I said, could I write a script? And he said, yeah. And then the next time I said, could I produce the next one? He said, sure. And so I produced one, and I had to hire a host to come and walk through and talk about the thing we were pitching. And we paid him like $500. I wasn't making $500 a week, maybe not a month.
Right.
And I thought, you got $500 for walking around writing the words I wrote, and you just put on a suit.
Yeah.
So the next time I asked my boss, Don Simonelli, could I host one? And he said, yeah, go for it. And I hosted one, and like a week later got an agent in Seattle, Lola Hollowell, this older woman who always wore pink.
Yeah.
And I got a job the day I got an agent. Wow. I got a job, and I started working. And I was the corporate video guy in Seattle. I would do a lot of training videos where you walk around and you go, at Eddie Bauer, when you have a customer, try to sell them socks. They need socks. Everybody wants socks. So I started making more money in front of the camera. And then I would do a shoot as an actor or a host, and I would do it for free in exchange for the gear for one day. And then I would direct a music video for a band. Seattle had a very hot music scene then.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to learn how to direct or tell stories while using the skill I had to make money or get the gear.
So when the first time you went in front of the camera and you were doing these kind of, I guess, corporate or whatever, these
Right.
videos, were you a natural right from the get-go?
I think I was a natural, which is, I know, a crazy thing to say about
Yeah.
yourself, but I have a really good short-term memory. Yeah. Terrible long-term memory. But I could remember 4 or 5 pages of stuff. Yeah. And I think that, more than anything, made me valuable because they thought, oh, we can get this shoot done in 8 hours like we need to. And that really was all it was memorizing words so that you could walk up to a counter and hit a line and walk to another counter and hit a line.
Right. Did that evolve into an actual hosting gig for a show?
No, the first hosting gig I got was also in Seattle. They were looking for somebody to host a gardening show, a home and garden show, and they wanted a woman. And my agent, Lola, had retired, and I had a new agent, Tish Lopez. And she said, well, they want a woman. I said, Tish, try to get me in. She goes, I called, they want a woman. I go, just tell them to at least see me. It's one of those stories. You really do sometimes have to fight to get them to see you. Yeah. And I went in and talked with the guy, and Rick Jones, and he said, you know what? I like you. I just said woman because I was thinking woman. I'm fine with the guy. You can have the job. And so for 4 years, Saturday mornings, I would talk about poinsettias and, putting good soil in the ground. I had no idea about gardening. I still don't. And nobody really watched the show. So we tried to make it as funny as we could. Yeah. We would do kind of what we thought was comedy at the time. But what I was learning was just how to be on camera and, how to do the things you need to do to work in the business. And I remember I made $500 and I asked for a $50 raise after 3 years and they said no. And I still have the letter. I wrote this long letter saying, I'm writing and I'm producing and I'm hosting and I know I'm making $500 a week. I'm wondering if you could bump it to $550. And the letter said, we appreciate your efforts, but no. And it was such a funny moment back then. I really wanted that $50.
Yeah, it sounded like that was symbolic too.
It was symbolic, and they were like, no.
Right.
Suddenly you remember, oh, right, that's right, I'm nobody.
Right. What was the name of that show?
It was called the Ernst Home and Garden Show because it was sponsored by a hardware nursery, Ernst.
Okay.
So really, technically, I think it was probably an infomercial every week, but we put it on as a gardening show. We just happened to go to Ernst to get our gardening supplies.
So that was in the Seattle area?
That was in Seattle.
Show? So what was your leap from the local scene to a national platform?
So the story for me was there was a local PM magazine type of show, and they were looking for a new host. Mm-hmm. The guy had left, and there was still the pretty girl, and they needed a guy. And I kept calling them, asking, can I get in? Can I get in? They said, no, we're gonna hire somebody else. And I was there at the station and I saw a box of tapes. And they said, these are the guys, we're gonna hire some of these guys. So I started going through the tapes. Now this was 20 years ago. Right. Greg Kinnear's tape was in there because he was hosting Talk Soup. Mm-hmm. And Matt Lauer's tape was in there. Wow. And he was a local news anchor. Right. I didn't know those guys at that time. But I was looking at their tape and I thought, what's on their tape that's not on my tape? It's just guys sitting around hosting things. Yeah. So I called their agent. They both had the same agent, Babette Perry. And I sent her a tape. And she said, are you willing to move? And I said, of course, I'll do anything. She goes, okay, you're going to New York on Friday to audition for the FX network. It's this brand new network out of New York. So I flew to New York. Stayed at the Paramount Hotel where rumor had it Madonna had stayed, and I couldn't believe I was in New York City staying at Madonna's hotel. Mm-hmm. It was the coolest thing in the world. Never thought I'd get the job. I got to audition. I couldn't wait to go home back to Seattle and say, I just flew to New York to audition for a TV show. And I thought that'd be the end of the story. And we did the audition, and the audition was really, really fantastic and completely out of the box. The audition was, you sat in a room, and at a certain point they grabbed you and you didn't know what was going to happen. And they took you in another room where there were people working and they gave you a microphone. And that was it. They didn't say anything. They just handed you a mic. Okay. And I think most of us probably thought, oh wow, okay. And you just make up something. You can make up whatever you want. I just started interviewing the people in the office and pretended I was on a show and thought I was terrible and flew home and got a call a couple days later and they said, you're hired. You need to be in New York in 3 weeks. And then I panicked. I didn't want to move. But that was my first job. And it was great because the only direction they gave us, the entire time I was there, Peter Feynman was the executive producer of the network, and he said, try something. And if it works, do it again tomorrow. And if it doesn't, try something else. And the network was all live. Tom Bergeron was there. Mm-hmm. Phil Kogan was there. A lot of people who are working today, we were all there at the same time. And it was incredible training because you were on the air. If your show was an hour, you were on every day for an hour. And if you didn't have something to do, try something.
So what was the show that you ended up doing?
I first started doing Back Chat, which was the last show at the end of the night. And it was designed to be letters to the editor about the network. People complaining about this or that. Turns out nobody was really watching FX. This was before the Shield was on. And so nobody wrote us. So we just made up letters. And we would think of something funny to do, and then we'd write a letter, like, how do they make bagels? And then we would go do a bagel shoot. So it was still, I was really getting paid to learn. It was crazy that I got a check every 2 weeks, and no one was around, and they just said, just keep trying things. It was very inventive, but I really appreciated what they were doing, which was, we have faith that there's something in you that we'll figure out. We don't know what it is. You may suck now, you may not suck tomorrow. So just keep trying.
Were these, even these fake questions, were they scripted or were you ad-libbing them? Did you just have like a topic list and you would just ad-lib?
Well, we would just literally write a fake letter.
Yeah.
And it would say, Dear Jeff, I've always wondered in New York City, why are all Ray's pizzas the only famous original Ray's? And then we'd get on the air and we go, so we got a letter from Tim. He says, why are Ray's pizzas all... We went out to find out, and then we just go do a tape piece. It was basically cable access.
Yeah.
Make your own show up. Only they paid us.
Did letters start to trickle in at all?
Oh, yeah. We have a few. I still occasionally will hear from some Back Chat fans.
Yeah.
And I usually know them because they were the same 5 guys who wrote us every week, keep helping us, helping give us ideas.
Now, FX was pretty new on the air. Was this show in any way a promotional tool for FX at all? Did that serve that purpose at all?
It was supposed to.
Yeah.
But really, nobody watched. Tom Bergeron was the big thing at FX. He hosted the morning show and called The Breakfast Show. And he was the star of the network. And we were all just doing other shows throughout the day. And then I ended up hosting a music show called Sound FX. And that story was it had another host, Orlando Jones, who then went on to Mad TV and then became an actor and started starring in movies. And they needed somebody. And so I loved music. And that was another great show, 11 to midnight, live, every night in New York City. Musicians would come through and play. Harry Connick would come through. And because we had a fully functioning apartment, which was our set, a 7,500 square foot apartment, you would get Harry Connick to cook dinner, and then he'd sit down at the piano and play. It was ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Done today, that same idea of a live apartment that is on all day. You can turn it on anytime and there's somebody in there doing a show. It's still a cool idea. They were just so far ahead and nobody had FX in their house.
Were the interviews off the cuff or did you have someone doing research? Were you doing your own research?
No.
Or just kind
interviews
of just
are,
very...
Yeah. I mean, we might have had a very small staff, but
Yeah.
it wasn't like a big produced show where you had blue cards with tons of questions. It was Harry Connick. You just talked about what you talked about.
You're a music lover, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did that combine two of your interests? Was it kind of like a marriage made in heaven, having the love of music and also being able to host an interview on a show? Was that
I loved
kind
it.
of at the time a dream job almost?
I loved the combination of music, the fact that it was live, there was performance, and then we got to interview them. And it could be a blues guy who you'd never heard of, or it could be some heavy metal guy, or Harry Connick, or anybody who was traveling through New York. And the great part was, everybody traveled through New York. I mean, they're musicians. Of course they're going to be in New York. And you would have times like I remember Dave Mustaine, who was a guitar player originally from a band, Metallica, and he got fired from them, and he had his own band, Megadeth.
Right.
Now, these are heavy metal guys, so they're kind of crazy. Yeah. But you have an hour of live television with them. And Dave Mustaine did one of the craziest interviews, at that time I could remember, because he said everything you can't say about what it's like to be a rock star with groupies. But we're live. And I'm just enjoying going, oh, this is fantastic. I know it'll never make the West Coast, but the East Coast is hearing a very unfiltered guy who's probably loaded right now, saying everything he could. And then Dave Mustaine was on Rock and Roll Jeopardy like 6, 7, 8 years later. And I came up and said hello, and he said, I owe you an apology. I was at my rock bottom when I did a show with you in New York City. And I don't remember the name of the show, but I remember I was out of control.
Wow.
And I said, wow, you're right. You were. And I love that you remember it. He said, that was my worst weekend. That was it. And then I started turning it around.
I think the original concept of FX included this kind of interactive component. Did they achieve that, did you think, in those early days?
Yeah, FX was also ahead of its time in terms of interactivity because they wanted the connection. We didn't have the social media, but they wanted you to call in and write in and do all those things, and they did. And on the show, you would often reference the people and say, Tim McElvey writes in from Toledo, Ohio, and he wants to know. So you were building that connection with the viewer. And from a principle, philosophical point of view, it seemed like a really great idea.
Did you feel any competition with the other hosts, especially the ones you mentioned, like Phil Kogan and Tom Bergeron, who were on kind of those early days too? Was there a sense of competition, or you're kind of all in it together? What was the feeling back then?
The unspoken elephant in the room at FX was the competition to get the better show. And the kingpin was Tom Bergeron. He had the most experience. He was the most composed. He could run a show. He's still very good, but he was very good even then. And then Phil Kogan was a reporter on that show, so he was all over the country doing live spots. And I was relegated to the last show at midnight when no one, including my mom, was watching. So yes, there was a bit of inside me going, man, I could do that morning show. I could do a reporting gig. And that's how it went. You had to prove yourself, and those guys had proven themselves. And so yeah, I definitely felt I think your ego was in play.
Did you get a sense, or were you learning at these early gigs what made a good host?
Yeah, I think I don't know if you learn what makes a good host. It's a good question. I've never even thought of it that way.
Maybe it comes back to you being a natural. I mean, did it feel like it was kind of working?
I think the best host, whatever a host is, they do their homework and then they are themselves. And that seems to be what differentiates people that you remember. Whether you like them or agree with them or not, that's a whole nother matter. But you have to be yourself. And so the only thing you have to do is prepare and then just be yourself. So I don't know that I learned how to host, say, from watching Tom Bergeron. I just learned, okay, there's a guy who's doing what he does very well, and it's engaging and captivating. But if you look at our two styles, they're very different. What he does on Dancing with the Stars and what I do on Survivor. And if he did Survivor and I did Dancing with the Stars, they'd be different shows because we both be ourselves now in a different situation.
Right.
So I think that maybe goes back to watching Johnny Carson. You're not trying to mimic Johnny Carson. You're just trying to absorb what is it he does. He comes out, he makes you feel at ease, he grabs your attention with a story, and then he hooks you in. And if it's not working, he bails on it and he goes to the next one.
Right. There's a mention here that you were in a TV movie before the FX gigs called Face of a Stranger.
Right.
What was that?
Well, Seattle had a pretty good movie and acting thing going on. There was Northern Exposure up there. There was Twin Peaks, a lot of commercials. And so every so often things would come through. And I'm not sure why that one's on my resume, but that was a really fun experience.
That really happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Jenna Rollins and Cynthia Nixon were in it. And Jenna Rollins was an icon to me because she was married to a big indie film director. And Cynthia Nixon, this was before she was on Sex and the City.
Right.
And it was for me, a big deal, but for the history of it was just a TV movie of the week type of thing.
Right.
And I had a small part playing.
But were you aspiring to be an actor? Did you think at the time you maybe would be an actor?
Not
full-time?
so much. I never really pursued acting that much. Sometimes I would get gigs as an actor because I was the right guy at the right time. What I learned from Face of a Stranger, and I can't remember the woman who directed it, but I was a little nervous because I'm with actors that are well known and big resumes, and the lines I had were whatever, inconsequential to me. I just wanted more. I didn't think I had enough lines to work with, so I thought I needed to add more lines. So every scene I would add a couple of more lines. And during the rehearsals, it gets to where I'm doing a damn monologue out there. And the director was so good with me, is every take she would come in while we were rehearsing and say, "Good job." And she'd pick up a couple peanuts off the table and she'd go, "You know what? Drop the lemon thing at the end. See how it feels." And she'd come back and she'd go, "Good job. Hey, lose the hair thing at the end. So it's really working." I didn't realize until I got home that slowly she had taken everything I had added and pulled it out, but had not damaged my confidence in the process. She had really worked to me to where I thought I was doing this amazing job, even though she was probably inside going, "Oh dear God, why did we hire this guy and how do I get through this scene?"
That was Claudia Weil.
Claudia Weil was the director. And I've never seen her since, but she did me such a favor because she really taught me how, not about acting, she taught me about directing, about how to instill confidence in an actor even when they're doing a terrible job, and to get them where you need them to go without them ever knowing you did it.
Back to FX. What happened to kind of the first incarnation of FX as it was evolving?
FX died an early death. It just didn't work. Nobody watched. And as everybody in this industry knows, it doesn't mean it wasn't good or didn't have good intentions. It just wasn't the right fit at the right time, as evidenced by the fact that a lot of talent have gone on to host shows. You know, you have three of us, Tom, Phil, and myself, hosting primetime reality shows. They had something going. It was just ahead of its time. And it died. I was out of there in, I think, 2 years. And I sort of made a deal to get out because I had a 5-year deal, and I agreed to host a series of afternoon shows, one on parenting, one on homes, one on medicine. There were 5 of them, in exchange for getting out of my contract early, because I just felt like this is not the right fit anymore.
In 1996, you hosted a reality series called Family Business. What was that about?
That was on FX.
Oh, that was on
Yeah,
FX. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of those that was on FX.
Okay.
That was part of it. That was part of in exchange for getting out of a 5-year deal, I agreed to host another show.
Right.
And one of those was Family Business, and one of them was Home FX, one of them was Medical FX. They all ended in FX.
Right.
And they were just all stories about a person's life,
Okay.
elements of a person's life.
And this one in particular, it only lasted a month or so. I mean, it was pretty short-lived.
I think it probably lasted a season. You would do, Monday would be medicine, Tuesday would be, so there might have only been 30 of them, but it probably was over the course of a...
So reality TV as sort of a named genre was kind of in its infancy around that time.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other shows you could always cite, but were there rules for the genre back then, or was it sort of like learning as you go in general, do you think?
Well, FX had no rules, and I didn't know that even a show that I was hosting then might have actually been a precursor to reality that we know today. You just thought of it as a show. It didn't have a name. Yeah. It was just, you're doing a show. You didn't call it a talk show. You just said, we're going to do a show. And the show is called blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so I had no idea. For me, what FX gave me was live. When it's live, you have to do something. And so it lets you develop this skill to where you feel like you could do 5 minutes on the end of a pier if you had to, and just make it up. And I think later, as you start interviewing more, you realize that you rely on that ability when you're stuck, is usually when I use it. If I'm stuck, or I go up in an interview, or I've lost my way, or I feel like I'm dying and I need to go somewhere else, there's that live training that lets you throw out a couple of softballs or something. And while that person's answering, your brain is going, where am I going with this to get back on track? And hopefully the audience never knows.
Tell me about your time at Access Hollywood.
Access Hollywood came as a result of me, Greg Kinnear, another connection to Greg Kinnear. Greg Kinnear had graduated from Talk Soup to later and is now an Academy Award nominated actor. Right. So once again, I'm following Greg Kinnear, trying to get the later gig. And I met with Gary Considine, and I pitched him, I just come from FX. I've done all this live stuff. I love interviewing people. Bob Costas, I loved his version of Later. The sit-down, one-on-one, Gary, I can do it. And Gary very politely listened to me, and he said, you're not going to get the gig. I already know who's going to get it. And first of all, it's going to be a woman, and she's great. And it's not you. And it was Alicia
Taylor?
No,
I think Aisha Taylor.
Aisha.
Aisha,
Yeah.
right.
Is that what you said, Taylor?
Yeah, I said, yeah.
Aisha.
Yeah.
And it was Aisha
Right.
Taylor who got the job. But he said, but I have this other show coming up called Access Hollywood. And so Gary Considine pitched me on this idea of Access Hollywood, and he said, here's the pitch. It's like Entertainment Tonight, except that you're going to interview David Duchovny maybe while you're shooting baskets. And you'll just talk about shooting hoops, and it sounded great.
Yeah.
He said, it's personality driven. Everything you were doing on FX, we want you to do here. Only problem was, it turns out David Duchovny doesn't want to shoot hoops with me. He wants me to go to the Four Seasons and interview him like everyone else is. And so Access Hollywood quickly became what it is today, which is a very traditional, well-produced entertainment news show. And it just was not a good fit for me at all. And I was very honest about that, saying I'm not the guy to interview celebrities in the vein that they need to be interviewed on Access Hollywood, which is a little more aggressive, asking questions that I wasn't really comfortable asking. And you would often find yourself, this is the truth, you would find yourself sitting across from a celebrity who's saying, you're not going to ask me about the thing and the other deal, right? Because it's so hard on my family. And then I'm saying, no, I don't want to be hard on your family. And then the producer in your ear is going, ask them about the thing and the other deal. But I don't care. And that's the truth of how this business goes. And so after a year, I said, it's just really not a good fit. And they were really kind to me. Rob Silverstein, who's still the EP, said, it's fine, you're out, go. And there was never any, I still see him, I'm still friendly with him. They were really kind to let me go.
Do you have any favorite stories that you did work on at Access?
I loved some of the stories at Access. The funny thing about my time at Access Hollywood is I, for a while, thought, man, that was a left turn. That wasn't a good spot for me. But ironically, it was one interview at Access Hollywood that helped me get Survivor. And it was Sandra Bullock, and I had interviewed her a few times. She doesn't remember me. I'm just another guy interviewing her. But every time I interviewed Sandra, she would try to give you something special that she didn't give the other guy. And I always appreciated it. And I always felt like, man, that is a decent person going out of her way. And so one interview we were talking, and she had a blouse and it was unbuttoned kind of low. And I said, Bullock, showing a lot of cleavage today. And she said, why are you looking at my cleavage? And I said, why are you showing it to me? And then she goes, well, unbutton yours. So I unbuttoned my shirt. And it was this silly little thing that never even made the air. But I had a demo tape. And at the end of my demo tape were these 30 seconds with Sandra Bullock. So when it came time for Survivor, at the end of the day, Mark said there were two reasons I picked you over the other guy.
Mark Burnett.
Mark Burnett. Right. There were Mark Burnett said there were two reasons I picked you over the other guy. One was all your experience at FX. I knew that live TV would be important because Survivor is basically a live show shot in the jungle. And two, it was an interview you did with Sandra Bullock. I don't know if you remember it. And I thought, oh my God, my left turn, it was actually a U-turn and it's going right back in the right direction. And he said, I just thought anybody who could have that kind of an exchange with a celebrity is the guy I want. And inside I'm thinking, she gave that to me. I just accepted it.
Yeah, that's great. What was the Lava Lounge?
The Lava Lounge was something we did on Access Hollywood where we took a bus across the country for a month and we were delivering the Grammys to the Grammy show. Mm-hmm. That was our purpose. And along the way, we would interview musicians or celebrities, but mainly musicians who were nominated for a Grammy. And we just crisscrossed through the country. And in the back, we had the Lava Lounge. And we also found the guy who made the Grammys. He showed us how he actually makes them by hand. And I remember we had a lot of people back there. It was a fun time because it was almost a place that felt not Access Hollywood-esque. It was a place you could be yourself. And I remember when Jenny McCarthy was on, and she was very hot, and we had a funny exchange. Oprah was on. Jay Leno was on. Weird story about Jay Leno being on. Jay Leno came on the Access Hollywood bus, went back in the Lava Lounge, We were talking. We did a 5-minute interview. We were going through Vegas, and he was doing a show in Vegas. And we step outside, and we're finishing talking, and he and I are just talking. And he's wearing his traditional denim shirt and jeans. This is a gruesome story, but we're standing outside talking, I think outside of the MGM, and all of a sudden we hear this just huge smack. And it sounded like somebody just hit somebody in the face with a fist. And we turn and we see a woman going over the top of a car. An RX-7 had hit this woman in the street, God. And that's what it sounded like. And she flipped over the top, landed in the street. Our guy on the bus, our bus driver, was an ER, a medic. He ran out into the street, revived her, brought her back to life, and she died the next morning.
Wow.
And it was this crazy, what just happened story that I'll never forget. It's the first thing I think of when I think of Jay Leno, because I'd never seen anything. I actually saw this accident happen. And it has nothing to do with television, but it is my connection to that.
Wow. So there were no cameras rolling at that
No.
time. It was just happened. Wow.
No, yeah.
Lava Lounge, is that the name Lava Lounge? Were there lava lights? Do you know
Yeah,
what that
we had
was?
some
I mean, it was just
lava
kind of
lights.
like a whole,
I mean, it's...
like a vibe or something.
Yes.
Was the whole thing. Were you talking about the ease you had, kind of bantering with Sandra Bullock? Were you starstruck by any of the celebrities you interviewed at that time?
The only people I was starstruck by at the time were Spike Lee. And the great thing here was the other fun thing about Access Hollywood. When a movie came out, they didn't care about the director. They never care about the writer. They only want the star.
Right.
But the director and the writer are still there to be interviewed. So when I was done, I'd always sign up and say, I want to interview Spike Lee. And they'd be like, fine, you can interview whoever. We're never going to use it. I go, that's fine. Yeah. So I'd get 20 minutes with Spike Lee. And I would literally be there with my paper going, all right, do the right thing. In that fourth scene, how do you do that shot with the... And it was film school. And then I'd dub them off on VHS, and I'd take them home, and I'd just have these little conversations with Brian De Palma was the same way.
Wow.
So I loved that, and that was worth more than the paycheck I was getting. The other great thing about Access Hollywood was I had no office. I have never had an office on any job I've ever had in TV, even though one's assigned to me here that you guys were going to shoot in. I've never been there. I don't sit in there. And at Access Hollywood, all I had was a pager. And cell phones were out, but I was reluctant because I thought they were kind of silly.
Yeah.
Who really needs a cell phone?
Right.
So I have a pager, and they would page me, and I would pull off the 405 and go to a payphone and dial the number, and they'd say, you're going to Houston, Texas to interview Tina Turner. Tuesday, tickets will be there. Okay, that was the job. I'd fly from city. I logged like 300,000 or 400,000 miles in 1 year just flying around interviewing celebrities. And it was the greatest job in that sense ever. It was like Dad wasn't home again. Once again, I'm being told, just show up, ask a few questions, and get out of the way.
Did you write your own questions, or did they provide you with them? Or
I think it's both. At Access, it's both. They were pretty good. And I've never been comfortable just taking what you give me and going with it. Again, it's that power. I want to have my voice in it. So while I might like the interview you drew up, I saw something in the research that I connected to as well. And so I'm going to probably interject that in the middle, and then we'll see where it goes. And it's the same way I have to do the talk show. It's all the influences are great, and you take all the different points of view that might be an entry point for an interview, but then you sit down and you see the guy's in a bad mood, and that card goes out the window, and you say, what's up? I can feel you're not digging this. You don't want to be here, and then you're off and running.
Right. So how did you make the move from Access to Rock and Roll Jeopardy? Was that the next project for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I left Access Hollywood, and then I auditioned for Rock and Roll Jeopardy. And I remember Ryan Seacrest and I were always auditioning against each other, and he was there at that one as well. And that was a great transition for me because the stakes were low, because it was Rock and Roll Jeopardy. So I could do it wrong and it'd be okay, but it was still prestigious in that I had the same team doing Rock and Roll Jeopardy who did Jeopardy. And they took it just as seriously as they take the real one, they took the music one. But it was a fun show because you could be a little lippy as the host. And even though they would edit out a lot of what I said because it went on, the show got too long, I was still, again, experimenting. How do you run a show and still have a personality and tell a story to the audience, you know, and make that player one, oh, you're the guy that's good in the 80s. You guys are dead if we got 80s questions. How do you just somehow create stories in that environment? And the other great thing about Rock and Roll Jeopardy was we taped all of our shows in 6 days. We would do 6 or 7 shows a day, tape for a week, and we were done.
For the season or
For the season.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was on VH1. Did it air on a weekly basis or was it?
Weekly.
Weekly.
It aired weekly
on
VH1. So we would shoot 25 shows in a week and we'd be done. And I got a little bit of money, but it was enough to last.
Okay.
And I was writing at the time. I was writing a script that I was would later direct.
So 25 shows equals 25 weeks, which is half a year just about. So it lasted about 3 seasons, right?
Yeah, we did.
Did they repeat? Did they go into repeats?
4 seasons.
Okay.
And they did
4?
repeat.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So was the premise essentially the same as Jeopardy?
Rock and Roll Jeopardy is the same as Jeopardy, only it's for music lovers. And so there were tons of people that came out of the woodwork, celebrity-wise, that wanted to play because they didn't know Jeopardy. Nobody can answer Russian literature for 500. But Madonna, Like a Virgin, I know that one. And that was part of the fun. When we'd have celebrities on, I don't think this guy will mind me saying it, Mark McGrath, for instance, from Sugar Ray, and then later Extra, he dominated in Rock and Roll Jeopardy. No one could beat him. No one ever did. He was always half drunk. He had 2 beers behind the podium. So that's the difference between Rock and Roll Jeopardy and Jeopardy. They're not drinking on the real Jeopardy. They're drinking on Rock and Roll Jeopardy.
Was it shot on the same set, just retrofitted or something?
Yeah,
Or
we shot
redressed?
Right,
okay.
I think we shot right around the corner from Jeopardy,
Okay.
like on the other half of the stage, and they might have moved some stuff around. But it was a very fast show, so fun to do. And now that I've had more experience, I see why Jeopardy's been on the air so long, because that show, even our version, was really well run. I mean, that was the difference between people who knew what they were doing.
How do you think you would have done as a contestant on Rock and Roll Jeopardy?
Not very well. I've been on Jeopardy a couple of times, and I'm not confident enough to see the lights go down and ring the buzzer and think I know the answer. And I blew it. In fact, I lost to Martha Stewart when I knew the answer, and I second-guessed myself, and it still haunts me. I barely beat Charles Barkley.
Oh, God. So when you started doing Rock and Roll Jeopardy, were you a fan of the original Jeopardy?
Yeah, I was a fan of Jeopardy, and I was a fan of Alex Trebek. I used to make fun of him for being uptight. You know, I would sit in judgment and go, dude, you're reading some answers. That's it. Or you're reading the questions, whatever, you know. But I would sit there and sort of say, Alex, get over yourself. And then I got to know Alex and realized he's a very funny guy. Yeah. He's telling a story. The story I'm telling on Jeopardy is these are very tough questions. And if you miss one, I'm going to make you feel worse because I'm going to tell you the answer with some attitude. Right. No, that was the gymnast Ulafi. Ulafi. All right, your question. And you're like, what the hell did he just say, Ulafi? And he always acts like he knows everything.
Right.
It's a great story.
Yeah. Like a walking encyclopedia.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
No matter how smart they are, just know I'm smarter.
So for Rock and Roll Jeopardy, you said it was a looser kind of a feel, even though it was the same format.
Right.
Did that allow for any major differences between Jeopardy and Rock and Roll Jeopardy?
Well, on Rock and Roll Jeopardy, what you have is a piece of paper, and it has all the squares of the board,
right.
And you have the answers in front of you. And I would go through and say, all right, if somebody runs this category, here will be the succession of answers. It'll be like a virgin, like a prayer, buried alive, and something else. And then I would look for a connecting joke somewhere in there, just in case you run that category. By the time you hit buried alive, I'm going to go, well, after being a virgin and praying about it, whatever I thought the joke was, I would try to have a story ready. You can't really do that on Jeopardy because it's so serious. They're playing for thousands of dollars.
Right.
We were playing like for a home stereo unit. Nobody really cared.
Right.
So it was just to have fun. And I think that's why it appealed to me, is the stakes. That's why I say the stakes were low. I wasn't going to screw anything up, really.
And it was VH1, too.
And it was VH1.
So did you ever hear from Alex Trebek about your hosting, you know, how you were doing as a host of Rock and Roll Jeopardy?
Well, I never heard how I was doing, but I met him a few times and he was always just very kind to me. But no, he never actually critiqued my, now that I think about it, what does that say? That he never said anything?
Well,
I don't know.
Maybe he was a tight-lipped, maybe that's part of his style, but he...
I do know that I didn't realize how fast Jeopardy moves.
Yeah.
Because when you're at home, you just take it, you're in the kitchen making some dinner. He is incredibly fast because those guys are like this and he is on it. And I know when I came in, I thought, this will be the easiest gig ever. They answer a thing, I read another thing. This is really simple. And all of a sudden you're going 200 comedy jokes, and you're 4 minutes late on the show.
When you first started Rock and Roll Jeopardy, did the producers, did they have discussions with you about kind of creating your own distinct style, not just being kind of a rock and roll version of Alex Trebek, if there could be even such a thing?
They didn't really have a discussion about creating a style. They were just, again, very encouraging to go with my style. They said, we like what you're doing. We like that you're trying to have some fun and you're lighthearted, but that you can run a game because you ultimately have to run the game. So keep it on time. Make sure people know who's ahead, who's going to win and what they win. And if you can dive in a little or, dump in a little personality in the midst of all that, then go ahead.
Were there any questions or contestants that stood out for you that kind of were memorable to you for that run? Or even celebrity contestants?
The celebrities were always the most enjoyable on Rock and Roll Jeopardy. Like the Dixie Chicks were all on at once. That was a really...
The three of them competing against each other?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we had George from the... he's a black guy with long dreads and they're always colored.
Kind of old school
Yes.
funk guy, kind
Yes.
of Clinton?
George
Clinton?
Yes.
Okay.
George Clinton was on, and just the image of him, this older black guy with long dreads, colored thread throughout, the idea of him taking a buzzer, looking at a series of lights, clicking in, and quickly giving you an answer. He didn't say a word the whole show. He'd just giggle over there like, this is the funniest thing. What are you guys doing? And then I also remember we had from the Eagles, the guitar player, Joe Walsh.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he, after the first round, I came by and I said, so how you doing with this? And he said, hell, there's a whole 10-year period there I don't even remember. These questions of the music I made. His era, he didn't know. He couldn't remember. It'd be like Joe Walsh, Eagles' first hit song. Joe Walsh.
Right.
Joe Walsh, Eagles' first hit song. You played guitar on it. You guys recorded it as a band. Nope. All right, Mark McGrath, gonna steal. Was that kind of a...
And he'd know the James Gang or whatever it was.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's probably part of the fun of the show, was that you never knew how it was going to be for these rock and roll stars to come on.
I think Rock and Roll Jeopardy could still be on, with the only problem being that Jeopardy, the producers are so serious about it that after 3 or 4 seasons, they said we can't go any harder on the questions because it'll be too difficult, and we can't go any easier because it'll be too easy. So we have to end the show. That's the only reason it ended. They just felt like they ran out of questions that could still fit in the brand, because it was a really fun show. And I still have people coming up and saying, I used to love Rock and Roll Jeopardy, because you can play along.
That show ran from about 98 to 2001, around that period of time. For you, since it was kind of heavily scripted in that you obviously had to give the answers to everything. How does that compare to doing more kind of off the cuff sort of hosting? Do you prefer one over the other?
No, I think it's just it just, what is the form? What is it that you're trying to do, and then you figure out what is the function, and then you try to figure out how to make it work.
After that show, you made some appearances, as you mentioned, on the traditional, the classics Jeopardy.
Right, where they basically give you the answers. They'll put if I'm on Jeopardy, they'll have a category called Survivor.
Okay.
And it will say the host of Survivor is. And the idea is that Martha Stewart and Charles Barkley are going to let you have your category.
Okay.
And you better get your category.
And it's always for charity, right?
It's always for charity.
Right.
But the funny thing is, when I played with Martha Stewart and Charles Barkley, Martha Stewart was in the green room with a Jeopardy board game practicing with her assistant. And when we got to Charles' category, it really was basketball for 200. You're supposed to lay off the buzzer. Martha jumps in. And I was like, what the? And Charles is over. That's how competitive people get. And you want to say, look, I'm not going to get any answers if you take the 5 they gave me. That's it.
Now, is there really something about part of the game is how good you are at pressing the
Yes.
button? Is that true?
It really is true. And I learned that from hosting, that there's a rhythm, because it doesn't matter if you have the answer. First, you have to be the first one to buzz in, but you can only buzz in once the lights are done. But you have to start the buzz just before the lights finish.
Right.
It's not when the guy reads the question. Even though you think it's Alex Trebek reading the question, there's a little series of lights. They go click, 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 click. And when the last click hits, boom, buzz in. So yes, there is some to that. And I blame that all the time. That's why you always see people going, I don't think it's Alex, it's not working. It's my buzzer. No, it's not it's you.
Did being a contestant take you back to being the host of Rock and Roll Jeopardy?
No, because I had no pressure as the host. Being a contestant's hard. Being on a game show, it's nerve-wracking. You're on Jeopardy. There's Alex Trebek, and he just asked you to host a Survivor, and if you miss it and you're about to, it's going to be humiliating.
Right. That's the real deal.
Yeah.
So you were a fake host on the Jeopardy? Is this,
No.
what
I was a contestant.
Yeah, and then is there a story about you? Oh, okay. I thought there was
I think we did an April Fool's.
Okay.
Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
I think so.
We did something on April Fool's where I did fill in. Yes, we did an April Fool's joke where Alex cut away from one question, and when they came back, I was there going, next question, and then when they cut back, it was Alex again. And that was just something they were having fun. I've maintained a really good relationship with the producers at Harry Friedman and everybody over at Jeopardy, and so every so often they call me to do a joke or
You've been a clue giver before?
clue giver. We used to shoot a lot of clues on Survivor. We'd go out and we'd be shooting Survivor, and then they would send me 8 clues about the Amazon, and we'd take a little crew out and just shoot. The answer is the Negro, Rio Negro, and then they would use it on the show.
Okay. Next couple of projects I'm just going to mention, and maybe
Okay.
you can just give me a quick, what it was
Yeah.
or what your involvement was. Dave is a Barlia, extreme stuntman.
Dave Barley, Extreme Stuntman, was a one-time special on NBC. Was a primetime show about a sort of a young version of Evel Knievel, this really good-looking stunt guy, Dave Barlia, and he just did stunts for an hour. He base jumped out of a balloon. He tried to jump his motorcycle over a thing, and I was the host. But for me, it was my first time on primetime TV. I had all my friends. I remember we were all around the TV, and I was the guy going, "What you're going to see today is going to blow your mind."
So were you with him, or you were just doing the presenting
No,
to
I was
the
with
audience?
him.
Okay.
And we did an interview, and it was all just another step. You don't realize it, that every step you're taking is a step toward the next thing. But you can sometimes get caught up in wondering, is this the right step or the wrong step, like I did with Access Hollywood. And what I'm learning now is just keep moving. Just keep moving forward. They're all helping you build whatever it is your journey you're trying to be on, and don't judge it so much. Just do it. Do your
And
best.
as you pointed out on Access, something really important happened that
Yeah.
then led to
Yeah.
Survivor, really.
Yep.
So you hosted a project called Hollywood on Trial. What was
Right.
that?
Hollywood on Trial was a pilot. I did a bunch of pilots. I think Hollywood on Trial, it might have, I honestly can't remember if it aired or was a
1999
pilot.
is the date I have.
Okay. It might have aired
Okay.
on CNN. I really don't remember. There was a whole time I did a bunch of dating pilots, and then I reached a point after Access Hollywood. I had Rock and Roll Jeopardy going. We shot for 1 week, and that was it. I was writing a screenplay, and I was saying no to a lot of jobs because I had reached a point where I thought, I want the next job to be one that I really can sink my teeth into. And if not, then I'm going to do something else, because that Access Hollywood just didn't feel like the right fit for me. And I was being offered a lot of sort of game show, dating type shows where you would read prompter, and I just thought, I'm not going to be happy doing this. Not that I'm above it, it's just not connecting to me.
Yeah.
And so I waited for a year and a half, and I got down to $8,000 in my bank account, which when you're a freelancer and that's all you have left, even though $8,000 is still a lot of money, I saw no dollar coming in. I had been dwindling down, and now I'm under 10 grand, and I still don't have a job, and I have rent to pay, and That was the point where I remember in my checkbook, I still had a little checkbook, and I'm like, wow, $7,900. Okay, I'm about out. And Survivor came.
So tell me about Survivor coming. You mentioned that the kind of outtake interview with Sandra Bullock certainly got Mark Burnett's attention.
Yeah.
But how did that evolve? How did you make the contact? How did you end up actually getting the gig?
I had, the way I got to meet on Survivor was I had been up for 2 big game shows, and I didn't get either one of them. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was on the air with Regis. It was a big hit. So every network was trying to find one. NBC had Winning Lines, and they went with Dick Clark. And CBS had 21 Questions, and they went with Maury Povich. But in both cases, I got a phone call saying, we really want you to understand that your skill is there, but you don't have a name, and we need a name. But if we ever have a show that doesn't need a name, we're interested. Great. So I hear Survivor being talked about on the radio. Mark Burnett was on the Jonathan Brandmeier radio show, and I was driving on the 405. And here's this guy that sounds British or Australian. I can't really tell, but he goes, it's just a crazy idea. I'm going to take 16 people, and I'm going to leave them on an island, and they have to work together. And then every 3 days, they vote somebody out. And at the end, the people come back, and they're the jury, and one person gets $1 million. It's a brilliant concept. And I'm in the car going, oh, my God, it is a brilliant concept. I got to get in on this. And I called my agent, and I was at William Morris, and I said, there's a show, Survivor, and I've got to get in. And it was at CBS, and they said, well, CBS likes you, so, we'll try to get you in. And I went in, and I was the first person Mark met with. And I remember being told that Moonves had said, yes, you can bring Probst in. He was a guy we considered for something else, and he knew me from Rock and Roll Jeopardy. And I sat with Mark for almost 2 hours, and I had all this stuff prepped. I had anecdotes here and there. I'd pull them out of my pocket. If he brings up camping, yeah, I'll make up a story about camping. If he says, can you fish? Oh, I caught a huge fish. None of which would have been true. Didn't matter. He talked for an hour and 45 minutes about what he saw. And man, he saw it all. He saw it all. He said it's this epic adventure, arcing stories, heroes and villains. And I'm enraptured. It's like Joseph Campbell coming to life. And at the end, he said, so is that it? And he had said to me, I don't think you can handle it. My concern is you're going to have rats crawling over you in our tents because we're going to be sleeping in tents, which we did. And I just don't think you can handle it. And man, that really tweaked me. And so I had like 15 minutes left, and I had a picture and resume there. And I said, let me just, this is not me. I'm not a studio guy. I'm a writer. I've been in therapy. I get this show. I'm the guy. And it was this big impassioned moment, to rip your picture up was this huge thing. And Mark goes, very nice to meet you. I was like, and I leave, and I'm thinking, how can this be? I'm so connected to this show. And I called all my friends that were hosts that I knew. And there was like only 10 of us at the time that were hosting TV shows. And I said, I just met on this show. I know I'm the guy for this show. When you know, I just know. And then they would all go, well, why don't you think I'm the right guy? Well, you're not the right guy. I know I'm the right guy. There's only one guy who could maybe do this show, and it'd be Phil Kogan. This guy I used to work with at FX. He's this Kiwi from New Zealand. But they got to want an American, right? I'm basically losing my mind over this horrible meeting I had. When I left, I had it pared down. It had to be me or Phil Kogan, a guy I'd worked with years earlier at FX. I don't hear anything. Month goes by. 2 months goes by. 3 months goes by. I really can't believe it because in my soul, I knew this was the one. So I made a letter in the bottle, and I wrote like 4 articles that had been printed somewhere, but put in a bottle and washed ashore. And in every article, it talked about this show Survivor, which was going to change the face of television. One article said, Survivor set a summer season viewing record. Survivor knocked Millionaire off the air. Survivor made Moonves so rich he bought his own island. And every story ended with, and experts say some of the success goes to the very likable but unknown Jeff Probst.
And you mocked all this up, all these headlines?
Mocked all this up.
Okay.
Put it in a bottle.
Let's leave it there. We'll pick it up in the next